listeners, it's Jana. Welcome back to Grief Out Loud. It's the Tuesday after Mother's Day weekend, and I'm wondering how you all fared out there. It's definitely the season, with Father's Day right around the corner in late June, and lots of graduation milestones in between. With this being episode 353, we have lots of past ones to check out if you're needing extra support right now. Today's conversation isn't about a specific day, but it is full of ideas and insights that I think can apply to every day on the grief calendar. Dr. Alan Lipscomb has dedicated his career to creating culturally responsive grief support for youth and adults rooted in anti-racist, anti-oppressive practices. Dr. Lipscomb shares personal stories of loss from his own childhood, the impact of racialized trauma on grief, and the importance of spaces where people can name, process, and be witnessed in their experiences. We discuss his recent qualitative analysis study of the Grief Resilient Affirming Care Through Empowerment, GRACE model, which trains mental health professionals in the school setting to support Black students who are grieving. We also explore the role of community and storytelling in processing loss, and why no one needs to be rescued from grief in order to be supported through it. Dr. Alan Lipscomb is a professor of social work and the associate chair at California State University, Northridge. Dr. Lipscomb is also a clinical psychologist and a licensed clinical social worker. He specializes in providing anti-oppressive and inclusive mental health services to individuals, children, youth, couples, and families of color. Dr. Lipscomb maintains a private practice, conducts local, national, and international trainings, and is a consultant coach and a keynote speaker. He has numerous peer-reviewed journal articles that center Black male grief experiences and has published 5 books on Black men and boys' grief, trauma, and healing journeys. Okay, here's our conversation. Dr. Lipscomb, thank you for making time to come talk with me today for this episode. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you for having me.
I know we're going to talk a lot about the work that you have done and are continuing to do to help create anti-racist, anti-oppressive, culturally relevant grief support services. But can we start with the personal, as we do here on Grief Out Loud? And are there any deaths or losses that really impacted you growing up or into your young adulthood?
Absolutely. I think my first significant loss in childhood was my paternal grandmother. She passed away when I was 12 years old. It felt all of a sudden to me. She was diagnosed with cancer, unbeknownst to us in the family. She kept it a secret. And so my memory of that process and experience was going to the hospital and seeing her for the first time in the hospital towards the end of her time. And I remember at that period and point in time, she had lost all of her hair. She only had like a little bit of a fuzz on the top. And I remember being startled by her appearance and how she looked. And then shortly after that visit, she had died. And the next thing I know, we were attending her funeral. And so that experience was very significant because we had spent a lot of time with my grandmother, especially in my earlier childhood, spending the weekends with her, etc. So it was like a loss of a vital figure in my life. A year later, a loss that I experienced was when I was wrongly accused of robbing a restaurant down the street from where I had lived at the time. And the reason why I refer to that as a loss is because it was the first time I realized that just looking a certain way, someone could impose an experience or an identity onto you that wasn't of you, and you have no control over that. And that was a lost experience of like my innocence, and really a loss around how I moved because I couldn't move the same way because of that dynamic. And if I had to identify 2 significant loss experiences, those would be the 2 from my childhood.
I'm wondering, If your grandmother had still been alive, what do you think she would have said to you or talked with you about that experience of being wrongly accused?
I think there would have been like an oral history, a narrative experience, being that she was born in the late 1920s and have lived through a lot of the, civil rights, Jim Crow movements. I think she would have been able to provide a narrative and a lived experience of what it was like for her, especially being brought up in the South, Louisiana to be exact. That wasn't really given to me because she wasn't there. So I didn't have that narrative experience around racialized experiences and racism. And so I think that that probably would have been something she would have provided me with during that time.
The personal narrative, the history, the context.
In addition to a strong religious and spiritual backing, I think that that was something she would have also offered as well.
With those two very profound and meaningful grief and loss experiences as a young adolescent, do you have a sense, you may not be able to answer this, but do you have a sense of the type of support you needed around your grandmother's death and the type of support you needed around that wrongful accusation? And were they
Mm.
similar or different?
Yes, I think with grandmother, a space to acknowledge, process, and mourn the loss, to name what that was like, versus we had it, we had the funeral, we had the service, and then we just continued on with the awareness that she was no longer with us, but there was no spaces that was created to talk about what the experience of mourning was like for me at that time. Similarly, with the accusation of being or doing something that I did not do, I think having a space to process what that was and name that so that I didn't internalize that would have been helpful at that time, just to process that experience. While I had support, it didn't show up in the way of grief support and loss support and trauma support.
I appreciate that even though those two experiences are so different, the core tenets are kind of the same, right? A space to process, to acknowledge, to name, to be validated in what you went through. I think that's so helpful to think about because sometimes we can imagine like a death loss needs this type of support and non-death loss needs this type of support, and oftentimes it's very similar mechanisms, even if the content of what we're processing could be very different.
Absolutely. And I often tell folks when I share my experiences of significant losses is that those two experiences were my coming of age into adolescence experiences, whereas for other, cultures and groups, they have a ceremony or something that, at the age of 13 or 15 or what have you, or 16. For me, it was the reality of this is a dynamic, this is a grief trauma experience that you're probably going to be faced with as a young Black boy. And so get ready for now how society can experience you and see you, right? And so that was kind of the precipice, if you will, of how I started to be aware differently of how I moved, how I engaged in different spaces because of those significant loss experiences around who truly sees me, who can I truly show up for, who can I be vulnerable with, who can I trust.
And I know a lot of the research that you've done is around attending to the grief of those racialized experiences, racialized trauma. As you started to do some of that work, I'm curious what you discovered in other people's experiences that either matched yours or offered maybe a different a different way of seeing or experiencing that.
Yes. What I realized in my research in clinical practice work is that no one named racialized grief and loss as a thing, right? It was very much separated. What I also realized and found out in the work that I've done is that for Black boys and young men, they're not given the space to name and acknowledge what their experiences are, and even to start expressing and emoting in spaces, whether that is in therapeutic spaces or grief counseling spaces or academic spaces, so on and so forth. I started to notice that that wasn't readily available and offered to young Black men and boys.
With that, do you have a sense of how the experience of racialized trauma impacts people's ability to grieve death losses or shapes how they grieve for death losses?
Yes, there's something so tricky about racialization is that it silences folks. It isolates them, right? And so if I learn based on external messages and how folks engage with me or treat me that I am up to no good, I am aggressive, it doesn't matter about what my experiences are or how I feel. It's always going to be seen or miscategorized as something. I'll just hold that in. So I won't express my feelings. And so if I am faced with a death, a loss, who do I tell that to? And how do they respond to that? Do they acknowledge it? Do they give me the space to talk through it? Um, do they hijack the conversation or the space? Do they move straight into trying to rescue, fix, or deny it? Or, devil's advocate, where are you sure that's what they meant by that, etc. Whereby erasing the grief experience.
I'm wondering too, because I've talked with some other guests about moving through the different, I don't want to know if the word requirement is right, but the different tasks involved in after someone dies or while someone is dying of an illness, like interacting with medical professionals, interacting with funeral professionals, interacting with the cable company that you have to call and like
Sure.
cancel everything. Have you heard stories of how those experiences are also impacted by the things you've already articulated of people responding in a particular way because of your racial identity?
Yes. What I've heard is that when they're engaging with other parties as a result of the death or trying to coordinate what's to come after, is there isn't an immediate identifying of this person must be grieving. There's either an assumed threat or discomfort because of the feelings that is coming up or how they're trying to manage and navigate. And so what I hear is that sometimes they have to go with someone else or someone else has to do it for them to support them during that time because they don't feel like they're in the right space to engage and or what they might encounter when they are engaging with the different parties or vendors.
That it might go beyond just feeling like frustrated or irritated, but moving into a space of feeling like penalized in some way.
Absolutely. And so grief gets truncated, grief gets stifled.
You mentioned the lack of, but also how much work goes into discerning like what is a safe person or place for me to start to express some of this grief or to acknowledge it or to name it. What are the places that you found or people that you found through your adolescence and into your adulthood?
Yeah, I think I have found folks who have been able to unapologetically just name it and call it, oh, that wasn't, your fault. That was racism, or that was you being racialized, or whatever. That was bias, etc. That has been helpful for me when people name that. I think also when I realized as a result of what happened when I was 13, that was PTSD and someone named that for me. A provider named that. It's like, oh, you have post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of what you went through. And that was powerful. There's something about naming what you've experienced or what you've been going through, especially in early adolescence, that you didn't know. You just think I must be crazy, like this is weird. And so it silences you, going back to the point. But when someone said there's something that's called something, that was powerful and reassuring as well.
Have a name for something, for a phenomenon that's not basically your fault, right? To think like, oh, this is
Absolutely.
something's wrong with me.
Absolutely. Because for the longest, it was like my secret, right? So mm, only those who knew about it, like close family, knew about it. And then I remember when I had to, so at the time and date where they said that I had committed a crime, it was the same date of my birthday party, my 13th birthday party. And so one of my friends who was at the party, I needed him to testify at court. And so that was the first time I told somebody in my peer group about like what happened. And I remember that feeling of having to say what happened to me and the shame that I had around that experience. And to this day, that was the only friend I told at that time. And for years until I became an adult, that I never told anyone what happened and what that story was.
So much of it lived in the silence of your own heart and mind.
Absolutely.
Through your work that you've done, your research and your clinical practice, what has shifted for you and how you understand grief?
I think one of the biggest things that have shifted for me is that specifically around men and youth is that they have to arrive at their grief experience. Like going back to the space, initially in our sessions, whether I'm providing grief support, counseling, or therapy, initially it's I'm good. I accept it. Oh, how was it when your grandmother died? Oh, it's okay. It was good. It is what it is. It was what it was. Like there's a lot of language around having to keep on living. But the longer we stay with it and allow them to kind of traverse their grief is when they start to arrive at their emotive experience, which is pretty powerful to start off saying, I'm good, it's okay. And then within 30, 45 minutes, we're getting to the deeper feelings around what you were not able to fully grieve. Oftentimes, I call that the misbereavement when they're not able to bereave and mourn the loss, but when they are able to have the space and someone allows for them to traverse their grief, they will arrive at their experience of what it's like and continue on that journey. And so that has been very powerful to slow myself down in those spaces, to not feel like I need to fill in the silence or rescue, that people get to wrestle with their emotions. They get to cry, they get to yell and scream, and that is okay.
In that slowing down process and not rushing to fill the silence, I imagine there are times where there are particular questions or ways of phrasing things that help that arrival process or don't at least don't get in the way of the arrival process. And I wonder if you have a few go-to ones you find yourself using often.
I think one of the phrasings that I often use is how I make things invitational, right? So I might say something like, do you mind if we stay here for a moment? Is it all right with you if we kind of unpack that a little bit? Can I go back and ask you about when that happened? Where did you go? Right? Can I ask what shifted for you right now? Right. So very much invitational to get permission to go deeper or to go back or to stay with something, I have found have been really helpful versus telling someone. So I want to stay here. Right? I want to, so centering myself, I want to stay here versus is this something we could stay with? right? Can we circle back to this, etc.? So making it more inclusive and also invitational has been a powerful intervention.
Well, and it speaks so strongly to one of our core tenets too, which is around choice and how, so often in grief, we have no choice. We have no choice about what happened to the people we care about. We have no choice about what happened to us. We didn't have it. Nobody asked our opinion or gave us any like control over that. So to build that in as much as possible in the grief process is so powerful.
Absolutely. I think the other thing that is equally effective that I do is I recognize for Black men and youth what it's been like to have to protect yourself and have a guard and have this shield of armor, if you will, just to get through life. And what it must take for you to give that up and let down your shield and your guard in those moments and those sessions with me. And so while I recognize the privilege and honor of them being able to go to be vulnerable and go there with me, I also want to make sure that I give them their shield and armor back before they leave that session with me. So I'll name that and give that back to them, right? So I might say something along the effects of, I just want to spend a few moments before we close out today by acknowledging you for your level of vulnerability and transparency. I recognize that this might not have been easy for you to go there and start to talk about the things that you've been holding on to for a long time. I also recognize that you can't leave here exposed the same way that you let down here. And so I want to offer you back what you gave up to go there with me. And so if that means you have to wipe your face and wipe your tears before you leave here, I give that back to you. If that means you can't show people this level of vulnerability, I give that back to you because that has what has gotten you this far. And I just want to uplift that too as part of your coping. So that's something that has been very, very powerful.
Well, it makes me think about this idea of we don't owe anyone our vulnerability. And I think
That part.
sometimes in the grief world there can be some pressure to say, here's this safe place, you should open up with me, you should talk about your feelings, and like that's not something anybody owes any of us, especially as practitioners.
1000%. And I recognize that, in 2026, no one's 100% safe. No one's living their best life in 2026. There's a lot of things that we are exposed to, that we are impacted by, that we are grieving, right? And so in that same vein and recognition, I try to make sure that I am creating a safer space for folks to emote, to traverse their grief, to arrive at their grief experiences, and recognizing that they have to go back into an environment in a community and space that's not 100% safe.
This is a little sideways question, but I want to ask you about your grandmother again, because you mentioned like the narrative oral history and what she lived through. And what do you imagine she would be saying right now about living in 2026?
I think she would be saying a lot about how history is repeating itself, a lot about how they navigated during those times, 40s, 50s, 60s, etc. And her ongoing, unwavering spirituality, faith, and religion practice to help ground her and help ground us during this time, I think is what she would be saying during this time.
Well, it makes me think too that the work that you do as a documentarian, basically, of people's grief experiences and their experiences of racialized trauma is in a way carrying on her tradition of carrying on that oral history of creating context for those of
Mm,
us who engage with your work. So,
I received that. Thank you.
speaking of your work, I came across you because I was reading the most recent paper. I think it's your most recent paper, testing out a new training model for mental health professionals in the school setting on culturally responsive grief support, specifically for Black youth. And when as I was reading it, I was like, wait, I want to know what are some of the components of culturally relevant and responsive grief support?
Absolutely, yes. So my recent article on the GRACE model and approach, which stands for Grief Resilient Affirming Care Through Empowerment for Black students. And what I have found is similar to some of the things that we've been touching on and talking about, that is in alignment with being culturally responsive when providing services, is centering them and their experiences, is honoring and incorporating cultural practices. So I talked a lot about like oral histories and narratives and storytelling. So incorporating that in the grief work that folks are doing in schools with Black students. I think also naming the source of the grief, or naming where it has impacted them, right? There's something so powerful again about naming that sounds like that was racism, that sounds like that was dot 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 dot. That I think is very powerful, and also assisting them with recognizing where they might carry it in their bodies too, right? And so that promotes healing, that promotes connection as they are navigating their grief experiences within the schools. I think the other part with this particular grace model is that it's what they're doing when they're working with the students, whether that's one-on-one or whether that's in a group setting, but it's also how are they showing up outside of that when they're not with the students? Yes. How are they showing up in different meetings that they might be in, whether that's a student success team meeting or an individualized educational plan meeting or a return to learn meeting, whatever it may be? How are you showing up in those spaces? And really teaching providers how to do that with the students, but also how do we advocate and support them when we're not in those spaces in supporting their grief experiences?
And the GRACE model is something mental health professionals in the school setting can use for both death and non death losses. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so they can use it whether they're in a school setting or not. So there may be folks who are not in school settings. They may be in other types of practice settings, but they're working with children, K through 12th grade ages. And so, yes, this is an approach that folks can use.
Is there a particular like activity or question prompt that's part of this model that would be specific to a student who was grieving, say like a parent or a sibling or a peer?
One of the great interventions that is in alignment with the GRACE model is grief mapping, where by grief mapping, they can draw, they can write, and identify the loss or the losses that they've experienced. What's their connection relationship to them? Um, what got lost as a result of their passing or death, if it's a physical loss? And what are some things that you want to do to maintain their memory or maintain their legacy or connection? And you can do that through grief mapping.
Oh, I love that. We have an activity that we often do called the Life Roadmap, where kids, teens, we do it a lot with our volunteers who are getting trained to be facilitators of mapping out all the losses that they've experienced over the course of their life. And they can draw it however they want to. They might think about like how fast, what was the speed limit at that period of your life, or what did the weather seem like? And people get really creative around those things. But I hadn't thought about the idea of as the road continues, how do you want to carry these people with us, and what
Mhm.
might that look like? So I might have to incorporate that next time I do the life roadmap.
Yes, absolutely. It's very, very powerful. And it's something that, to your point, we could build on, we can return to, we can pull it out, they could keep.
One of the things I'm always thinking about is when I'm sitting with a group of kids or teens who are grieving, there's a lot of focus on the individual story. My dad died, my mom died, this is how it impacted my family. And one of the things I wonder about with trying to create interventions or ways of approaching grief that are more culturally responsive is bringing in the community. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit to that.
Yes, when we can bridge, encourage, support community, I think not only is it in alignment culturally, but it also allows us to move away from this rescuer dynamic that I am the only one who can support your grief. No, there are folks in the community that can support and is supporting the grief. How do we bridge that? How do we uplift that? How do we highlight that in the work that they are doing? And so being intentional about asking, like when we're assessing around the grief, what are some things that you do in your family? What are some things that you do in the community around this? What are some things that you do during holidays or birthday of the person who has died, right? So that's ways that we can bring in familial practices or community practices as well.
You've mentioned this rescuing piece a few times. So I wanted to see if we could talk a little bit about that because it seems like a pothole that some of us might trip up on. So I wondered if you could just say a little more about that.
Absolutely. One of the things that I often say is that we all default somewhere when we're uncomfortable with grief and trauma. We all default. We have somewhere we go intrapsychically when we are holding spaces with folks who are grieving, regardless of who they are. Some of us, we go to a place of inappropriate humor or laughter because maybe it's so uncomfortable. It's like laughing at a funeral. Some of us, we lean in or we overly lean into it where we kind of decenter them and we make it about us. Some of us, we are rescuers, fixers. We are big on psychoeducating. We are big on providing resources or telling folks what they need to do or what they can do. And so, what becomes important is to recognize one, this causes some discomfort. Two, what's my default? Where am I going? And three, if I'm going to any of those places, i.e., rescuing, I need to check that and push through that because not every situation requires me to rescue. No one wants to be rescued. They want to be experienced. They want folks to go with them along this journey, not to take it away. And I think far too often we try to take away the pain versus allowing them to arrive at that experience or to process that, or even to sit in that emptiness experience of the loss and what it's like without us interjecting, interrupting under the guise of rescuing, fixing.
I just got to say that out loud one more time that no one wants to be rescued. They just want to be experienced.
Yes.
And I think that is something that, as folks working in the field, I need to remind myself a lot because sometimes when people first arrive, maybe not necessarily into their grief, but they come in their grief, they are saying, please take this away. What do I do? What are my top 10 steps to get out of this pain? So it's easy to get pulled into, like, I want to help you with that.
Absolutely. And even because my default, I'm a self-proclaimed rescuer fixer, right? And so I have to manage that. And so even with that you offered, I might say something like, before you can get over this, we have to go through it. We have to be able to allow you to experience what it is and what's coming to you, and that is going to come to you in waves throughout your time, throughout your life. And so this is more of a journey versus a destination of your grief.
Which some people are like, oh, I really don't like that answer, but okay.
I know. It's the reality of it.
Right.
And I have yet to have someone come back and say to me, you told me I would be done with this if I just did these five things. Because we know that's never going to work, right? That's never going to happen because we know grief is complicated, right? Grief is intersectional.
Oh, speaking of that, what do you turn to for your own grief? Where do you go for support? What helps you?
Yeah, I turn to family. I turn to therapy. I turn to my faith. I turn to somatic work, like recognizing where I'm carrying the grief in my body and what are some ways in which I can release it, right? I love float therapy as a way to kind of release it from the body. So any type of somatic work, and also solitary time. Time to myself so that I can sit with the experience and the feelings so I can name what it is for me, identify what's coming up, what activated it in this moment, remembering the good times, remembering the challenging times, and just go in it versus trying to deny it or stuff it all in has been helpful for me and where I go.
Seems like that's where your research skills come in really handy because you are a little bit of an investigator of your own experience.
Absolutely. That's where it started, right? That's where I started this whole journey was that who knew that years later I would be at this place and space because of something that started off as so traumatic, right? But now has been so healing.
And for you and for so many others too, that your work is reaching
Absolutely.
so many people. And in that context of the kind of the larger scope of what you do, in this moment, if you could change the landscape of grief support for Black youth and their families, what would you focus on first?
I think, of course, with a magic wand, I would want to take all grief away, right? But we know that's not life, that's not human, and this is part of our human experience. I think what I would do is really work with providers, practitioners, clinicians, and counselors around, and this is part of the work that I do. It's how they are recognizing it, how they are assessing for it, how they manage it, and also how they support the healing process of Black youth and families during their bereavement process and journey. I think that's the biggest thing that I want to do and that I've been doing to change the landscape for Black families and youth who are experiencing grief and loss.
Yeah, it's really ensuring that the providers have the education, the support, and the knowledge that they need. Which leads to one other question in that realm of I think sometimes we can read like culturally responsive grief support, culturally relevant grief support, and think the people doing the provision of the support need to match the race or culture of the folks that they are supporting. And just wonder what your take is on that.
I know it is powerful when providers represent the community in which they're providing the services to. And so that is something that is very, very much so needed. I also know that it is equally powerful when someone can show up in a way that is affirming, in a way that is anti-racist, in a way that is healing centered. I specifically, going back to my own experience, I specifically chose someone around my own grief and therapy who did not look like me, who did not identify as me. Why? Because of the work that I do around Black male grief and trauma. I didn't want to have that as a dynamic in the space. And so, to your point in question, this does not exclude folks who are not Black identifying from providing and feeling like they have a say so or a part in this work. That you may be very powerful in how you show up and what you can do that can be healing of someone's trauma and grief as a provider.
This is another sideways question for you, but in that, who or what are you reading lately or listening to lately that is supporting you in this work that you do?
Hmm. Right now, I've been immersed in a lot of the research work that doing, but one of the books that really spoke to me was My Grandmother's Hands.
Mm.
My Grandmother's Hands, very powerful book, and it talks about like racialized trauma and grief that is in alignment with my journey and work. And I think it provides this kind of compass, if you will, on how I approach grief and loss work through all the different layers.
And that book is such an experiential one of going through the practices yourself as you read it.
Yes, yes.
You mentioned your research that you've been deep in lately, and what's next in your research efforts? What are you excited about?
Absolutely. So, what's next for me is I will be going on sabbatical in the fall. I am going to be doing an ethnographic research project looking at memorialize grief and healing. So I will be going to the National Museum on Peace and Justice in Alabama, also known as the Lynching Museum, to really look at what does it mean to have a space in place that identifies names of those who have been murdered, killed, assassinated, etc. But what does it mean to have a space where we can go and see that? But also, what does that do for healing of grief? And really looking into that deeper is what my next project is. And I'm excited about that work.
Yeah, well, we'll have to have you back on Grief Out Loud once we get to the end of that project so you can talk more about it with us.
Absolutely.
Well, Dr. Lipscomb, thank you for the work that you do, and then taking time to share about it with me and with our listeners. And for folks who want to follow along with your research efforts to learn more about the GRACE model of your upcoming projects, like where can people best connect with you?
Absolutely. So folks can follow me on social media. I am on Instagram at Dr. A. Lipscomb. That's Dr. A. Lipscomb. Feel free to follow me there. I put updates on the things that I am working on, speaking engagements, etc.
Great. And listeners, I will link to those places to connect with Dr. Lipscomb in the show notes. I'll also link to an interview that you did. Of course, in this moment, I can't think of the name of the podcast, but it was talking with a mom and her son about grief, and the way you talk with him about his questions that he had for you was just delightful. So I will link to that as well.
Thank you.
So Dr. Lipscomb, thank you again for your time and your work that you do in this world.
Thank you for having me.
And listeners out there, I say this each and every time, but thank you for being part of our listening community, for making the show mean something, for sharing episodes with people who might be interested in what we are talking about here. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at griefoutloud@dougy.org. That's DOUGY.org. That's our main website. And if you head there, you'll find information about our local grief support programming, all of our free downloadable resources such as tip sheets and activity sheets, and of course, each and every episode of Grief Out Loud. Another place to check out on our website are our online learning opportunities. So we have a variety of self-paced classes that you can take. So you can just head to dougy.org to learn more about that. I'm always excited to share that the podcast is sponsored in part by the Chester Stephan Endowment Fund. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us again next time.